What if the Emperor's greatest creations were tainted before they even drew their first breath? 20 demigods scattered across the galaxy like fragments of a shattered star. 20 suns, each crafted to be perfect instruments of humanity's salvation. But perfection, it seems, was never the plan. Deep within the warp forges beneath the Himalayan mountains, something went catastrophically wrong. Or perhaps terrifyingly right. The Primarchs were meant to be pure. Genetic masterpieces born from the Emperor's own essence, each one a living weapon against the darkness. But in the moment of their creation, when the infant demigods floated in their gestation pods, and reality itself held its breath, the dark gods struck. They reached through the veil between worlds with hands made of impossible geometry and ancient malice, and they touched each child. Not to destroy them. No, that would have been too merciful, too simple. They marked them, claimed pieces of their souls before the Emperor could seal them away behind psychic wards and imperial faith. The question that haunts every scholar who dares study the Primarchs is this: were they corrupted, or were they simply shown their true nature? Consider Fulgrim, the Phoenician. Perfection incarnate, they called him. Beautiful beyond measure, talented beyond reason, driven by an insatiable need to excel in all things. But that hunger, that endless dissatisfaction with anything less than absolute flawlessness, where did it come from? Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure, the dark god of excess, had whispered into the genetic tapestry of Fulgrim's soul. Not corruption at first. Just a suggestion. A predisposition toward perfectionism so extreme it could only end in one place: damnation. Every brushstroke of his art, every perfect sword form, every exquisite experience was a step closer to the precipice. And when he finally fell, when he lifted the Lar blade and let the demon inside, Slaanesh merely collected what had always belonged to it. Then there was Magnus, the Crimson King, the most powerful psyker among the Primarchs, a being who could read the fundamental language of the universe itself. The Emperor warned him about the warp, about the dangers of delving too deep into forbidden knowledge. But Magnus couldn't help himself. The thirst for understanding, the absolute certainty that knowledge could solve all problems, that truth was worth any price, it was woven into his very DNA. Tzeentch, the architect of fate, the changer of ways, had touched him in the cradle. Every spell Magnus learned, every secret he uncovered, every time he thought himself wise enough to control forces beyond mortal comprehension, he was simply reading from a script written before his birth. When he shattered the Emperor's psychic wards around Terra, desperately trying to warn his father about Horus's betrayal, he wasn't making a tragic mistake. He was fulfilling his purpose. Mortarion wore his hatred of tyrants like a badge of honor. He liberated Barbarous from the overlords who poisoned its air and enslaved its people. He swore he would never kneel to any master, would never become the thing he despised. But Nurgle, the Plague Lord, the god of decay and despair, had already planted something in him. An understanding of suffering. An intimate knowledge of endurance through pain. Mortarion survived in poisonous atmospheres that would kill any other being. He embraced rot and resilience in equal measure. And when he finally knelt before Nurgle to save his Death Guard from endless torture, it wasn't corruption. It was homecoming. The god of entropy had simply waited for its son to accept his inheritance. Angron's rage burns eternal. Literally now, as a demon prince, but even before that, even before the butcher's nails were hammered into his skull, there was something in him. A fury so profound it could tear down empires. Khorne, the blood god, the Lord of Skulls, had marked him. Some say the Emperor found Angron too late, that the nails destroyed whatever potential he had. But what if they didn't destroy anything? What if they simply revealed what was always there? A warrior who found peace only in the midst of slaughter, whose only honest emotion was wrath. The nails didn't make Angron a monster. They just removed everything that wasn't already monstrous. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. Not all the corrupted Primarchs fell to chaos. Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter, never pledged himself to any dark god, yet he was perhaps the most obviously touched by the warp. His visions of the future, his absolute certainty that fate was inescapable, his descent into using terror as not just a weapon but as a philosophy. He saw his own death and walked toward it, claiming he had no choice. Was that prophecy or programming? Did chaos need him to fall, or was his existence as a prophet of inevitability and horror enough? And what of the loyal ones? This is the question that keeps Imperial scholars awake at night, that sends some of them screaming into madness or sobbing into the arms of the Inquisition. If the traitor Primarchs were marked, touched, predisposed toward darkness, then what about their brothers? What did the Chaos Gods plant in Guilliman's obsession with order, in Dorn's unbending stoicism, in the Khan's wild love of freedom? Were the loyal Primarchs simply given different gifts, ones that didn't lead to obvious corruption? Or did they resist something that their brothers couldn't? The Emperor never spoke of that night. The night the Primarchs were scattered. He launched the Great Crusade, found his sons one by one, and acted as though nothing was wrong. But he knew he had to know. When he looked at Lorgar and saw the seed of fanaticism, when he watched Perturbo's bitterness grow like a cancer, when he witnessed Horus's pride swell with each victory, did he see the touch of the dark gods? Did he hope that nurture could overcome nature, that a father's guidance could burn away the taint woven into their genetic code? The Horus heresy wasn't a betrayal, it was an eruption, an inevitable one. The Chaos Gods had loaded the dice 20 times over, in 20 different ways. They didn't need all the Primarchs to fall, they just needed enough. Enough rage, enough pride, enough excess, enough despair, enough ambition, enough nihilism. They had planted their garden in the Emperor's laboratory, and all they had to do was wait for harvest time. There's a theory whispered among the most radical members of the Inquisition. A theory that gets people declared heretics and mind-wiped if they speak it too loudly. It goes like this. The Emperor knew. He knew the Chaos Gods would strike at his creations. He couldn't prevent it. But maybe, just maybe, he could direct it. Maybe the Primarchs weren't corrupted. Maybe they were sacrifices. Weapons designed to be infected, to carry the plague of chaos into the open where it could be fought, rather than leaving it to fester in the shadows of humanity's collective unconscious. 20 sons, 10 to fall, 10 to stand. Perfectly balanced. Perfectly planned. But if that's true, if the Emperor willingly created beings he knew would be tainted, beings he would have to fight, beings who would tear the Imperium apart and condemn humanity to 10,000 years of darkness, then what does that make him? The archive cells of the Inquisition hold fragments of knowledge, incomplete, dangerous. They speak of the moment of scattering when infant gods were hurled through the warp. In those fragments, there are descriptions of whispers. Not voices exactly, more like impressions. Fingerprints left on wet clay. Each of the 4 great powers of chaos reached out and touched the infants as they tumbled through the immaterium, and in that touch, they left something behind. A gift, a curse, a promise written in the language of DNA and destiny. The records are fragmentary, destroyed by the Emperor's own hand in most cases, but what remains paints a picture that would shatter the faith of entire sectors. Slaanesh didn't just touch Fulgrim. The Prince of Excess ran its fingers through the genetic code of perfection itself, whispering that beauty without limit, experience without boundary, sensation without end was not corruption but ascension. And here's the truly insidious part. Fulgrim's entire philosophy, everything he built the Emperor's children upon, was correct within its own logic. The pursuit of excellence is noble, the refinement of skill is worthy. It's just that Slaanesh understood something the Emperor perhaps didn't, or chose to ignore. There's no endpoint to perfection. No moment where the artist can set down the brush and say, "This is enough." The horizon of excellence always recedes. Push far enough, and eventually you're not pursuing beauty. You're pursuing the pursuit itself. And that's when Slaanesh smiles. Fulgrim's fall wasn't sudden. It was inevitable from the first time he felt dissatisfied with a merely excellent result. From the first time good enough felt like failure. Every member of the 3rd Legion inherited this from their gene father. The obsessive attention to detail, the inability to accept limitation, the slow transformation of pride into hubris, and hubris into something that doesn't even have a name in Low Gothic. There are reports, sealed under Vermilion-level clearance, of Emperor's Children Marines in the days before the heresy, who would spend weeks perfecting a single sword technique, not eating, not sleeping, until their brothers had to physically restrain them. The line between dedication and obsession had already blurred. Slaanesh had simply made sure there was no line at all. Magnus, though. Magnus is where the theology gets truly complex. The Thousand Sons Primarch was blessed, or cursed, with a gift that Tzeentch values above all others: the ability to see patterns. To understand how the threads of fate weave together, how the past influences the future, how knowledge is the ultimate form of power. But Tzeentch is called the Deceiver for a reason. The gift came with a flaw, hidden so deep that Magnus never found it, might never have even suspected it. For all his wisdom, for all his understanding of the warp and its denizens, Magnus never understood the one truth that mattered. Some knowledge is not meant to be known, not because it's forbidden, but because the knowing changes the knower. Every time Magnus peered deeper into the warp, every time he bargained with entities he believed he understood, every time he used his phenomenal power to reshape reality according to his will, he wasn't gaining knowledge. He was becoming knowledge, becoming information, becoming data for Tzeentch to read and interpret and use. The Crimson King thought he was studying the warp, but the entire time, the warp was studying him. His greatest strength, his bottomless curiosity, his absolute faith in the power of understanding, was the very thing that made him perfect for Tzeentch's purposes. And the most horrifying part, Magnus still doesn't fully understand this. Even now, even as a demon prince, even after everything, he believes his fall was a tragedy of misunderstanding rather than a symphony conducted by the changer of ways from its beginning. The Thousand Sons carry this inheritance in their very bones. Before the rubric, before Ahriman's desperate attempt to save his brothers transformed them into dust inside their armor, they were already changing. Mutations sprouted like flowers after rain, not because they were corrupt, but because their gene seed was written in a language that reality itself struggled to read. Flesh is just information made solid. And when you inherit the pattern of a being touched by the god of transformation, your flesh becomes a suggestion rather than a certainty. The flesh change wasn't a disease. It was a feature. Mortarion's inheritance is perhaps the most viscerally horrifying because it masqueraded as resilience. The Death Guard were known for their endurance, their ability to march through any hell and emerge on the other side still fighting. They could breathe poison, survive radiation, endure wounds that would kill any other Astartes. This was seen as a blessing, a practical adaptation for the horrors of war. But endurance and entropy are closer than anyone wants to admit. The ability to survive damage implies the acceptance that damage will occur. The capacity to persist through decay means you must first embrace decay as natural, as inevitable, as simply another state of being. Nurgle's touch gave Mortarion something unique among the Primarchs: empathy for suffering. He understood pain intimately, not as an abstract concept, but as a constant companion. He climbed the mountains of barbarous, breathing air that burned his lungs, building resistance one agonizing breath at a time. And in that crucible of endurance, Nurgle planted a seed: the understanding that suffering could be transformed. Not eliminated, but accepted, even cherished. That pain could become comfort if you simply stopped fighting it. The Death Guard's fall wasn't about corruption, it was about exhaustion. They had endured for so long, had pushed through so much agony, that when Nurgle offered them release through acceptance, it felt like coming home after a war that had lasted centuries. There's a particularly disturbing passage in the Confessions of a Death Guard apothecary, extracted by the Ordo Malleus before his execution. He described the moment of transformation not as a fall into darkness, but as a letting go. Like a man who has been holding his breath underwater, finally allowing himself to breathe. The agony of resistance replaced by the peace of surrender. Nurgle didn't corrupt them. He simply convinced them to stop fighting against their own nature. Angron's inheritance is the most straightforward and perhaps for that reason, the most terrible. Khorne doesn't do subtlety. The blood god doesn't plant seeds or weave complex plots. Khorne simply takes what is already there and amplifies it until nothing else remains. Angron was born with a capacity for rage so profound it terrified even the Emperor. The Butcher's nails didn't create that rage, they just gave it a voice. Every World Eater carries this legacy. The gene seed doesn't just make them aggressive, it makes them feel most alive when dealing death. The rush of combat isn't just adrenaline, it's ecstasy, it's purpose. It's the only time the screaming in their heads goes quiet. But here's what the Imperium doesn't want to acknowledge, that clarity in combat, that sense of rightness in violence, it's not entirely wrong. War is humanity's oldest language. Violence is sometimes the only answer that evil understands. The World Eaters were perhaps the most honest of all the legions. They didn't dress up their purpose in noble rhetoric or high ideals. They killed, that was their function. And they were magnificent at it. Khorne's touch didn't pervert them. It perfected them for the role they were always meant to play. The question that haunts the survivors of the heresy is this. If Angron was born to rage, designed to kill, given a nature that could only find peace in war, then who bears the responsibility for what he became? The Chaos God who touched him, the slavers who tortured him, or the Emperor who found him and pointed him at humanity's enemies like a weapon, never once asking if a weapon might want to be something else? The loyalist Primarchs carry their own inheritances, though these are spoken of in whispers even quieter than those about the traitors. Guilliman's obsession with structure, with systems, with the belief that every problem has a logical solution if you just organize efficiently enough. Where did that come from? His adoptive parents on Macragge were nobles, yes, but Guilliman's drive went beyond learned behavior. It was fundamental to his being. Some inquisitors have theorized that Tzeentch touched him too, but instead of giving him the gift of change, gave him its opposite, the desperate need to impose order on chaos, making Guilliman the perfect eternal administrator, forever building systems that the changing universe will forever erode. A different kind of trap, a different kind of torment. Dorn's absolute unbending stubbornness, his inability to compromise, to bend, to accept that some walls cannot be held. Was that entirely his own nature? Or did Khorne touch him too, giving him not rage but its mirror image? Absolute, immovable conviction. The Imperial Fist's gene seed makes them feel pain more acutely than other Astartes, not less. They hurt more but show it less. They endure through will rather than numbness. And in that trait, in that determined, gritted teeth persistence, there's an echo of something older. Something that understands that sometimes the only worthy existence is struggle. The lion's paranoia. The Khan's need for freedom that bordered on inability to commit. Russ's embrace of savagery dressed up as controlled barbarism. Vulcan's almost obsessive compassion that sometimes led him to make decisions that cost more lives than cold pragmatism would have. Corax's guilt, so profound it eventually drove him into the warp itself, hunting the word-bearers through hell for 10,000 years. Sanguinius's red thirst, the flaw in the Blood Angels' gene seed that made them hunger for blood and violence in ways that even other Space Marines found disturbing. Were these flaws, or were they features? And if they were features, who designed them? The Emperor, or something else? There exists a document, known only as the Unspoken Scroll, allegedly written by Malkuta the Sigillate in the final days before the Siege of Terra. In it, he supposedly confessed his deepest fear, that the Chaos Gods didn't corrupt the Primarchs at all. They simply revealed them. That every single one of the Emperor's sons was exactly what they appeared to be. That the Emperor had created 20 mirrors of humanity's virtues and vices. amplified to godlike proportions, and then acted surprised when those amplified traits produced exactly the results they were always going to produce. Malcador's fear, his true terror, was that the Emperor knew this from the beginning and did it anyway. Because if you want to unite a broken species, if you want to forge an Imperium from a shattered world, you need more than heroes. You need archetypes. You need symbols that people can follow, can believe in, can die for. And symbols don't have to be perfect. They just have to be recognizable. The noble general, the wise scholar, the enduring soldier, the wrathful warrior, the perfect artist. 20 flavors of humanity distilled to their essence. And if half of them fall, if 10 of your 20 symbols become cautionary tales instead of inspiration, well, that's a lesson too. A warning about hubris, about ambition, about the dangers of trying to become more than human. The Imperium doesn't just venerate the loyal Primarchs. It also defines itself by what it isn't, by what it rejected when half the legions turned traitor. Perhaps that was always the plan. The implications spiral outward like cracks in a glacier, each one threatening to shatter the ice completely. If the Emperor designed his sons to fall, then every battle of the heresy was theater. Every death was scripted. The burning of Prospero, where the space wolves tore through the 1,000 suns like wolves among scholars, wasn't a tragic misunderstanding. It was exactly what was supposed to happen. Lemon Russ, the Emperor's executioner, unleashed on Magnus not because of failed communication, but because the stage required a villain and a hunter. The symmetry is almost beautiful in its horror. One Primarch marked by Tzeentch, one marked by something else, perhaps older, perhaps more primal, and between them the inevitability of violence. But there's another layer beneath this, something that the Forbidden texts hint at, but never quite say directly. What if the Chaos Gods themselves were playing a game they didn't fully understand? What if in reaching through the veil to mark the infant Primarchs, they weren't corrupting the Emperor's plan but completing it? The warp and materium are not separate. They are reflections, echoes, the same reality viewed from different angles. Emotion feeds the warp influences emotion. It's a loop, a circuit, with no clear beginning or end. When humanity feels rage, Khorne grows stronger. When Khorne grows stronger, humanity feels more rage. The same is true for all the dark gods. Now consider, the Emperor creates 20 demigods, each one a concentration of human traits amplified beyond mortal limits. Each one capable of inspiring billions, of changing the psychic weight of entire sectors through their mere presence. Each one a beacon in the warp, a lighthouse of emotion and purpose so bright that every entity in the immaterium would feel it. What happens when you introduce that much concentrated essence into a universe where thought and reality are already bleeding into each other? The Primarchs weren't just tools for the Great Crusade. They were anchors, focal points. 20 new stars suddenly appearing in the sky of the warp, each one burning with a different color, attracting different moths to their flames. The Chaos Gods didn't corrupt them. The Chaos Gods crystallized around them, found in them perfect vessels for aspects of themselves that had previously been diffuse, scattered, undefined. Fulgrim didn't fall to Slaanesh. Fulgrim became the lens through which Slaanesh could focus its attention on real space. Magnus didn't serve Tzeentch. Magnus became the question that Tzeentch asks the universe. What is the price of knowledge? Mortarion became the embodiment of endurance through decay. Angron became wrath given purpose and direction. And the loyal Primarchs? They became something else. Not opposites, but counterweights. Guilliman's order balancing Magnus's change. Dorn's stubbornness standing against Perturbo's bitterness and innovation warped into siege warfare. Sanguinius's nobility and hidden darkness existing in tension with his traitor brother's open embrace of their flaws. The Emperor didn't create heroes and villains. He created a system. A machine made of demigods, designed to reshape both the material galaxy and the immaterial warp simultaneously. There's a moment described in the visions of a long-dead Eldar Farseer, preserved in the Black Library. She saw the moment of the Primarch's creation, not from the material side, but from within the warp itself. In her vision, she described the Emperor not as a man, but as a thing of light so bright it burned to look upon, standing in a place between moments. Around him, 20 templates, 20 patterns, each one a geometric impossibility, a shape that should not exist in 3 dimensions. And into each one, the Emperor poured something of himself. But not just himself. He pulled from the warp itself, reached into the Imperium and took pieces of the dark gods, not asking permission, not bargaining, simply taking. Theft on a cosmic scale. The Chaos Gods' intervention, their scattering of the infant Primarchs, wasn't corruption or revenge. It was reclamation. They were taking back what had been stolen from them, marking what was already partly theirs. The tragedy, the beautiful, horrible tragedy, is that both the Emperor and the Chaos Gods were right. The Primarchs were the Emperor's sons, and they were also Chaos's children. Both things, simultaneously, impossible to separate. This explains so much. Why the Emperor could never bring himself to destroy the traitor Primarchs, even when he had the chance. Why he hesitated on the vengeful spirit when facing Horus, his most beloved son, now wearing the skin of a demon prince. It wasn't sentiment, it was recognition. To destroy Horus would be to destroy part of himself, yes, but also to destroy part of the machine he'd built. Even corrupted, even as an enemy, Horus was still serving a function, still playing a role in a drama that required both light and shadow to have meaning. The Emperor's duel with Horus is taught in the Schola Progenium as a simple story. The noble father forced to strike down his corrupted son to save humanity. But those who have accessed the sealed accounts, who have read the testimonies of the custodians who witnessed it, describe something more complex. They describe a conversation happening simultaneously with the combat, words exchanged in languages that predate human civilization. The Emperor asking Horus if he understood. Horus, his mind fragmented across a dozen demonic entities, answering in voices that were and were not his own. And at the end, when the Emperor finally unleashed his full power and burned Horus out of existence, the custodians swear they heard something that might have been laughter, not mocking laughter. The laughter of a mathematician who finally sees the elegant solution to an impossible equation. What if Horus understood in that final moment what he had always been meant to do? What if his fall, his rebellion, his attempt to kill his father and take Terra, all of it was necessary? Not because chaos required it, but because humanity required it. Because a species that had conquered the stars through technology and ambition needed to learn what happened when ambition went too far. Needed to see the face of the enemy, not as an abstract force, but as their own heroes corrupted. Needed to understand that the darkness wasn't something alien and external. It was them. It had always been them. The Imperium that rose from the ashes of the heresy is not the Imperium the Emperor originally envisioned. It's paranoid, brutal, theocratic, everything he supposedly fought against. But it's also unified in a way the pre-heresy Imperium never was. United by trauma, by shared enemy, by the understanding that they came within a single moment of complete annihilation. The Emperor sits on the golden throne, neither alive nor dead, sustained by the sacrifice of 1,000 psychers every day. A warning made flesh, a reminder that even gods can fail. And in that failure, in that eternal suffering, he shapes humanity more effectively than he ever could have through simple conquest. The traitor Primarchs, meanwhile, exist in a different kind of hell. Demon princes, yes, powerful beyond mortal comprehension, but also prisoners. Mortarion commands plague fleets but is himself eternally rotting, eternally decaying, never finding the release of final death he once craved. Magnus knows everything and understands nothing, forever unraveling mysteries that only lead to deeper mysteries. Tzeentch's perfect eternal student. Fulgrim experiences every sensation existence can offer and is bored by all of it, chasing a perfection that retreats faster than he can approach. Angron's rage has consumed everything that made him a person, leaving only the rage itself, burning forever with no fuel but its own burning. They won and lost simultaneously, gained immortality and lost themselves, became gods and stopped being real. The loyal Primarchs faced their own torments. Guilliman, awakened from stasis in the Dark Millennium, looks upon the Imperium he helped build and sees a nightmare. Everything he fought for twisted into dogma and decay. But he continues anyway, because that's what he does. That's what he was made to do. Build systems, organize logistics, administrator of an empire too vast and broken to ever truly fix. His hell is effectiveness without purpose. The others are gone. Dead or disappeared, or transformed into something that makes death seem peaceful by comparison. Dorn's hand is all that remains, allegedly. Russ vanished into the warp. The lion sleeps in the bowels of the rock, waiting for a time of greatest need that may never come or may have already passed. Vulcan is rumored to return periodically, but each time less himself and more a story people tell. Korax is a monster in the warp, no longer hunting word-bearers so much as he is the nightmare they deserve, a creature of pure vengeance and shadows. And Sanguinius, beautiful, doomed Sanguinius, the most beloved of all the Primarchs, who saw his own death and walked toward it anyway, who faced Horus on the vengeful spirit and died to wound him, to create the opening the Emperor needed. Every blood angel carries within them an echo of his final moments. The Black Rage, they call it, when Sanguinius's gene sons relive their Primarch's death, experience his final agonized moments, die 1,000 times while their bodies continue to fight. It's presented as a flaw, a curse, a sad consequence of their gene father's sacrifice. But what if it's not? What if it's the point? The Blood Angels are perpetually mourning, perpetually angry about an injustice that happened 10,000 years ago. Perpetually, they refuse to let Sanguinius's sacrifice be forgotten. In a galaxy where memory fades and even the greatest deeds become legend and legend becomes myth, the Blood Angels keep the truth alive in their very blood. They are living monuments, walking witnesses. And the Black Rage, that moment when they completely lose themselves to their gene father's final stand, isn't madness, it's communion. It's religion made cellular. Sanguinius, who supposedly rejected chaos more completely than any other Primarch, who embodied nobility and sacrifice, who gave everything to protect what he loved, might be more present in the current Imperium than any of the living Primarchs. Because he's not a person anymore, he's an idea. And ideas, in a universe where thought shapes reality, where the warp responds to belief, where enough faith can literally alter physics, ideas are more powerful than any gene-forged demigod could ever be. Which brings us back to the original question, the one that started this spiral into forbidden knowledge. What did each Primarch inherit from chaos? The answer, it seems, is everything. And nothing. They inherited potential, direction, a nature that would express itself inevitably given time and pressure. But here's the twist that the Inquisition's most secret conclaves have only begun to suspect. Inheritance goes both ways. The Primarchs didn't just receive something from chaos, they gave something back. 20 different interpretations of what the dark gods could be. 20 new flavors of corruption, but also 20 new possibilities for resistance. The chaos gods that existed before the Primarchs were scattered and diffuse. The chaos gods that exist now have focus, direction, personality. The formless hunger of Slaanesh has Fulgrim's face now. The endless scheming of Tzeentch speaks with Magnus's voice. Nurgle's garden grows according to patterns Mortarion taught it. Khorne's rage follows the cadence of Angron's fury. The Primarchs didn't just fall to chaos, they taught chaos how to fall on humanity. And this is where the machine reveals its true purpose. This is where the game board finally becomes visible in its totality. The Emperor didn't create the Primarchs to conquer the galaxy. He created them to define chaos, to give the formless dark gods form, to take entities of pure concept and emotion, things so vast and incomprehensible that they existed across all of time simultaneously, and compress them into patterns that mortal minds could understand, could recognize. could fight. Before the Primarchs, how did you fight chaos? How did you defend against entities that were everywhere and nowhere, that attacked through thought itself, that corrupted through the simple act of existing in a universe where they existed? You couldn't, not really. You could resist individual manifestations, kill specific demons, ward against specific incursions, but the source? The fundamental problem? Untouchable. Like trying to fight the concept of anger itself rather than an angry person. But give anger a name. Give it Angron's face. Give it the World Eater's berserker charge and the sound of the butcher's nails clicking in 1,000 skulls. Suddenly, anger isn't an infinite, omnipresent force. It's something specific. Something that can be recognized, predicted, countered. The Emperor created focusing lenses for the dark gods, and in doing so, he created their first true vulnerability. He made them understandable. And anything that can be understood can be fought. The cost, of course, was astronomical. 10 legions. Half his sons. Billions of lives in the fires of civil war. Terra itself shattered. The imperial palace a tomb. The Emperor reduced to an eternal prisoner of his own dying body. The Imperium transformed from a civilization of progress and reason into a theocratic nightmare that would horrify its founder. That's not a cost. That's apocalypse. That's the end of everything the Great Crusade stood for. Unless it wasn't the cost. Unless it was the payment. Unless every single catastrophe, every betrayal, every drop of blood spilled during the heresy was actually the forging process. Not the destruction of the Imperium, but its birth. The real Imperium. Not the dream the Emperor sold to his sons, but the weapon he was actually building. Consider what the Imperium became after the heresy. A galaxy-spanning theocracy where the Emperor is worshipped as a god despite spending his entire life rejecting divinity. Where faith is literal armor against chaos, where prayer actually works. Where the Imperial Creed isn't just doctrine, but demonstrable reality. The living saints who manifest in moments of greatest need. The miracles witnessed by billions. The way that battlefields can shift based on the faith of those fighting on them. This isn't metaphor. In Warhammer 40,000, belief shapes reality. The warp responds to emotion. And 10,000 years of quadrillions of humans believing the Emperor is a god, praying to him, dying in his name, has created something in the warp. Something vast. Something that wears the Emperor's image the same way demon princes wear the images of the Chaos gods. The Emperor rejected godhood, but humanity made him one anyway. And in becoming a god through their faith, through their belief, through their worship, he became something that can actually fight the Chaos gods on their own level. Not as a mortal wielding power, no matter how great, but as a warp entity of equal magnitude. The Emperor didn't fail when he was struck down by Horus. He ascended, traded his humanity, his dreams of a rational Imperium free from superstition, for the raw power needed to hold chaos at bay for 10,000 years and counting. The Primarchs were the catalyst for this transformation. Their fall created the crisis. The heresy created the trauma. Trauma created the desperate faith, and faith created a god. Each traitor Primarch focused one aspect of chaos into something definable. Each loyal Primarch became a pillar upholding the new order. And the Emperor, neither fully alive nor truly dead, became the keystone holding it all together. But there's something else. Something the most ancient of the Harlequins whisper about in their performances, coded into their dances in ways that human observers never quite understand. The Eldar, who have watched empires rise and fall, who birthed a chaos god through their own excess and decadence, they recognize something in the pattern of the Primarchs that humanity misses. They see it because they've done it before. The Eldar pantheon didn't always exist as it does in their myths. The gods were made, shaped, created from the collective psychic potential of the Eldar race over millions of years. Kain, the bloody-handed god, Isha, the mother, Val, the smith, Sigurach, the laughing god, each one an aspect of the Eldar psyche, made manifest and powerful enough to stand against the Chaos Gods for eons. The Emperor is trying to do the same thing, but faster. Much faster. He doesn't have millions of years. Humanity is too fractious, too diverse, too prone to falling to chaos on an individual level. But if you could create focal points, demigods that embodied specific aspects of humanity, and then use those demigods to shape both material and immaterial reality simultaneously, you could speed up the process. Compress eons of psychic evolution into a few thousand years of concentrated belief and trauma and warfare. The Primarchs aren't individuals who inherited things from chaos. They're tools, weapons, components in a machine designed to bootstrap humanity into becoming something that can survive in a universe where thought and matter are no longer separate things, where the gods are real and hungry and patient, where extinction is the expected outcome for any species that can't fight, on both the material and psychic fronts simultaneously. And the inheritance works both ways, propagating forward through time in ways that become clearer the further you stand from the events themselves. The Space Marines, those angels of death, posthuman warriors beyond fear and doubt, they carry the gene seed of their Primarchs. And in that gene seed is an echo of the Chaos touch. Not corruption, not in the Loyalist chapters, but potential. The black rage of the Blood Angels. The savagery barely contained in the Space Wolves. The obsessive paranoia of the Dark Angels, hunting their own fallen brothers across 10,000 years, keeping their shame secret even from their allies. The stubborn, suicidal pride of the Imperial Fists, who perform the Pain Glove ritual, who scrimshaw their own bones, who seem to seek out the hardest battles as if punishment for some unnamed crime. Every Loyalist chapter carries a shadow, a flaw, a darkness that mirrors the obvious corruption of their traitor cousins. It's not a weakness in the gene seed. It's proof that the gene seed is working exactly as designed. Because warriors without darkness, without the capacity for excess or rage or despair or ambition, wouldn't be effective against enemies who are made of those very things. You can't fight monsters by being wholly unlike them. You have to understand them. Carry a piece of them inside you. Stand close enough to the abyss that you can reach in and drag others back, even if it means risking the fall yourself. The traitor legions that fled to the Eye of Terror 10,000 years ago, they're still there, still fighting, still changing. Demon princes leading hosts of corrupted space marines and mortal cultists in endless wars against each other and occasional strikes against real space. But here's what the Imperium doesn't acknowledge: they're contained. The Eye of Terror is a wound in reality, yes, but it's also a cage. A place where chaos can express itself fully, where the dark gods can play out their eternal conflicts, where all the fury and ambition and excess and entropy that might otherwise spill across the galaxy is instead concentrated in a single festering sore. And who created the circumstances that led to the Eye of Terror's formation? Who pushed the War Master into position? Who allowed the heresy to play out just so? Who made sure that when the traitors were finally beaten back, they fled to that specific region of space? Every decision the Emperor made during the Great Crusade led toward that moment. The Webway Project, that desperate gamble to free humanity from warp travel, it failed. But its failure created the conditions needed to bind the Emperor to the Golden Throne. To keep him half alive, half dead, permanently positioned at a nexus point, where he could hold the Astronomicon lit and the Palace Warp Rift closed, and simultaneously maintain a psychic bulwark against chaos that spans the entire galaxy. A machine made of suffering, a god built from sacrifice, an empire forged in betrayal. And at the center of it, 20 genetic templates, each one touched by chaos, each one inheriting something from the dark, each one passing that inheritance onto their sons and their sons' sons, spreading the pattern across 1,000,000 worlds and 10,000 years. The Primarch's inheritance from chaos wasn't corruption. It was complexity, depth, the capacity to exist in multiple states simultaneously, to be both human and beyond human, to be loyal and yet carry the seed of betrayal, To be noble and yet understand evil intimately. They inherited paradox. And they passed it on. This is why the Imperium endures. Not despite its darkness, but because of it. Not despite the flaws in every gene line, but because those flaws are also strengths when viewed from the right angle. The Imperium is 10,000 years of managed catastrophe, of controlled falling, of dancing on the edge of annihilation while calling it victory. And it works because the alternative, the clean rational vision the Emperor originally sold, wouldn't have survived the first real encounter with chaos. You can't fight irrationality with pure reason. You can't fight gods with atheism. You can't fight corruption with absolute purity. You fight by knowing your enemy, by carrying a piece of them inside you, by inheriting their touch and refusing to let it consume you completely. The Primarchs did this. Some failed. Some succeeded. All of them taught humanity what was possible and what was forbidden, and where the line between them existed, if it existed at all. And now, in the 42nd millennium, with the galaxy split by the Great Rift, with demons walking on 1,000,000 worlds, with Primarchs returning from myth and legend, the inheritance is coming due. Guilliman walks among his people and sees what his father's dream became. Magnus leads his 1,000 sons in schemes that span centuries. Mortarion spreads his grandfather's garden. The others remain in shadow, but their presence is felt. Their inheritance passed on through their sons continues to shape reality. The question that remains, the one that makes even the High Lords of Terra wake screaming, is this: was it worth it? Was the cost paid worth the weapon purchased? Has humanity become something strong enough to survive? Or has the inheritance of chaos simply created new forms of damnation wearing the Emperor's colors? The answer exists somewhere in the space between one heartbeat and the next, in the moment when a space marine faces an enemy that looks like himself but corrupted, and has to choose whether to see a monster or a mirror. The mirror cracks. That's what's happening now, across 1,000 battlefields, in the visions of 1,000 seers, in the nightmares of 1,000,000,000 faithful. The reflection that the Emperor created, that careful separation between loyal and traitor, between Imperium and chaos, it's fragmenting. Not because the distinction was false, but because it was always incomplete. A simplification. A story told to children who needed heroes and villains, black and white, when the truth was written in shades of gray, so subtle they bleed into each other until you can't tell where one ends and another begins. There's a Blood Angel librarian, name redacted from all records, who experienced something during a meditation that the Inquisition classified as extremis hereticus. He described falling into the Black Rage, that familiar descent into Sanguinius's final moments. But this time, something different happened. Instead of experiencing only his Primarch's death at Horus's hands, he experienced Horus's perspective simultaneously, felt the War Master's anguish at what he was doing, the love that still existed beneath layers of corruption. The moment when Horus, even empowered by all 4 Chaos Gods, hesitated, couldn't quite deliver the killing blow cleanly, made it last longer than necessary, not out of cruelty, but because some part of him was still trying to make his brother understand something, trying to communicate a truth that had no words in any human language. The librarian came out of the vision changed, not corrupted. That was verified through every test the Inquisition could devise, but changed. He could no longer hate the traitors with the pure, clean hatred that the Imperium requires. He understood them. And understanding is the first step toward forgiveness, and forgiveness is heresy when the enemy is chaos. They executed him anyway, had to. Not because he'd done anything wrong, but because the understanding he'd gained was more dangerous than any demon possession. Ideas are contagious. Truth more so. And the truth he'd glimpsed was that the inheritance flows both directions through time. The traitor Primarchs didn't just corrupt their sons. The loyal Primarchs carry the same potential for damnation, the same touch, the same darkness. It's not a matter of better or worse, stronger or weaker. It's context, circumstance, the specific pressures applied at specific moments. Guilliman knows this now. Returned to a galaxy he barely recognizes, working with Eldar who his father would have exterminated, making compromises that would have been unthinkable in the Great Crusade's glory days. He looks at his Ultramarines and sees what his gene seed has created. Perfect soldiers. Perfect administrators. Perfect believers in a system that their Primarch himself finds horrifying. They worship him. Literally worship him as a living saint, the avenging son, the Emperor's chosen. And he can't correct them because the Imperium needs that faith. Needs the certainty. Needs the simple stories about good and evil, loyal and traitor, human and demon. But Guilliman has spoken with his traitor brothers now. Not in person, but through emissaries, through the strange channels that exist in the warp where linear time becomes negotiable. He's heard Mortarion's laughter, dry and rattling like wind through a plague garden, when discussing the state of the Imperium. You see it now, don't you, brother? The rot we tried to burn away, it's not in chaos, it's in the system itself. In hierarchy and faith and the machinery of empire. Welcome to my grandfather's garden. You're already standing in it, you just refuse to see the beauty in the decay. He's felt Magnus's presence, vast and terrible, and still somehow recognizably his brother, speaking in riddles about the Webway project, about their father's true plans, about secrets layered beneath secrets. Knowledge is change, Roboot. You're learning this. Every fact you discover about what we've become makes you different than you were. How many revelations until you're not the Guilliman who fell at the Sala anymore? How many truths until you're something new? That's not corruption, brother. That's evolution. And somewhere, in the deepest watches of the night, when even Primarchs can feel something like fear, Guilliman wonders if they're right. Not about the chaos worship, not about the service to the dark gods, but about the fundamental nature of the universe they inhabit. A place where stagnation is death, where change is inevitable, where the only choice is whether you direct the transformation or let it happen to you. The inheritance reveals itself fully in these moments, not as corruption, but as understanding. The traitor Primarchs inherited the touch of chaos, yes, but they also inherited humanity's capacity for love, honor, brotherhood, all the things they carried into damnation with them. Horus loved his father even as he killed him. Fulgrim wept as he murdered Ferrus Manus. Magnus tried to save everyone and damned himself in the process. Mortarion knelt before Nurgle to save his sons. Even Angron, rage made flesh, fought against the nails until the end, tried to be something more than a killer until the universe proved to him that killing was all he'd ever be allowed to be. The loyal Primarchs inherited something too, though. Not from chaos directly, but from the possibility of chaos, from standing close enough to damnation to see their own reflections in it. Sanguinius knew the red thirst intimately, died with it singing in his veins. The lion kept secrets from everyone, even himself, paranoid in ways that mirrored Kersey's madness. Russ played at being a savage and became one. The Khan rode the edge of freedom and abandonment. Vulcan's compassion was so intense it became its own form of extremism, making him vulnerable in ways a crueler Primarch never would be. They're not opposites, the loyal and the traitor. They're variations on themes, different expressions of the same fundamental code. And that code, that genetic template written by the Emperor and touched by chaos and shaped by circumstance, it contains multitudes. The Space Marines who fight across the galaxy, loyalist and traitor alike, are all children of the same source. Brothers divided by choice and loyalty and the accidents of history, but brothers nonetheless. This is the secret that destroys faith. This is why the librarian had to die. Not because the knowledge was false, but because it was true. Because if the line between loyal and traitor is thinner than Imperial doctrine claims, if the inheritance of chaos exists in every gene seed to some degree, then what is the Imperium fighting for? What does loyalty even mean when both sides carry the same potential, the same darkness, the same light? The answer comes from an unexpected source. A demon prince, once a word bearer, now something that barely remembers its original form. It manifests on a dying world where Ultramarines are fighting cultists, and before anyone can react, it speaks. Not to kill or corrupt, but to testify. You ask what you inherited from chaos. Everything and nothing. You inherited possibility. The universe before the fall was deterministic. Matter behaved according to laws. Energy transformed predictably. Even gods, if they existed, were distant and indifferent. But the war in heaven changed that. The warp became conscious. Emotion became energy. Thought became thing. And in that new universe, the only crime is pretending you're still living in the old one. The Ultramarines kill it, of course. Banish it back to the warp with bolter and blade. But the words linger. Echo in minds trained to be certain, to know without doubt that they fight for right against wrong. The words create questions. And questions are the inheritance of Tzeentch, the legacy of Magnus, the first step towards seeking answers that might not comfort. Across the galaxy, the pattern repeats. Chaos Space Marines who remember what they were before the fall, meeting loyalist cousins who wonder what they might have become in different circumstances. The Night Lords who never truly worshipped chaos, who kill and torture and spread terror because it's what they are, what they were made to be, finding common ground with the Carcharadons, the Space Sharks, loyalists so dark and brutal that they're barely distinguishable from the traitors they fight. The World Eaters, lost to the red haze of Khorne's favor, facing the Blood Angels in the grip of the Black Rage, and in those moments when Berserker meets Berserker, who can say which inheritance is worse? The Great Rift opened, the galaxy split. Demons walk on worlds that never knew chaos existed. The thin veil of ignorance that protected most Imperial citizens from the truth has torn wide. And in that tearing, the inheritance becomes impossible to deny. Every human carries the potential for corruption because every human feels emotion, feels rage and ambition and despair and desire. And in a universe where emotion shapes reality, where the warp responds to thought, those feelings are not metaphors. They're weapons. They're vulnerabilities. They're the price of consciousness in a conscious cosmos. The Primarchs understood this from birth, had to understand it, carrying souls so bright they could be seen from the warp without eyes. Each one made choices about how to handle their inheritance. The traitors embraced it, tried to harness it, and were in turn harnessed by it. The loyalists rejected it, suppressed it, built walls around it, and found that what you cage gains power in the caging. Neither approach was fully right. Neither was fully wrong. Both were necessary to map the boundaries of what was possible. And now, 10,000 years later, the map is complete. Humanity knows what lies on both sides of every border, knows the cost of loyalty and the price of betrayal, knows that chaos offers power and slavery in equal measure, knows that the Imperium offers purpose and oppression with the same hand. The inheritance has been cataloged. The gifts from chaos have been received, studied, weaponized, martyred, sanctified, and damned. What remains is the choice. The choice every human makes every day in ways small and large, to serve or rebel, to accept or question, to have faith or seek truth, to be the person you were made to be or fight to become something else. The Primarchs inherited their natures from chaos and the Emperor both. Their sons inherited from them. And down through the ages, through the gene seed and the teachings and the legends and the warnings, the inheritance spreads. Not corruption, not damnation, potential, the capacity to be more or less than human, to rise or fall, to shape reality through will or be shaped by it. That's what each Primarch inherited from chaos. Not specific gifts or curses, not powers or weaknesses, but the fundamental truth of the universe they inhabit. A truth the Emperor knew when he reached into the warp to steal fire from gods who weren't yet fully formed. In the end, the inheritance is this: consciousness in a conscious universe is both privilege and curse. The ability to think, to feel, to choose. These make humanity vulnerable to chaos, but they also make humanity capable of resisting chaos, of standing at the precipice and choosing not to jump, of carrying darkness and refusing to let it define you, of inheriting damnation and calling it destiny and fighting every day to prove that destiny wrong. The Primarchs, loyal and traitor alike, demonstrated every possible response to this burden. And in their demonstrations, they gave humanity a template, not for perfection, but for survival, for endurance, for the long, bitter, glorious struggle to remain human in a universe that offers 1,000 easier alternatives. The Librarium Sanctus on Macragge contains a chamber that few are permitted to enter. Not because it holds forbidden knowledge, though it does. Not because it's dangerous, though it is. But because what it contains is too honest, too raw. In this chamber, preserved in stasis fields and psychic wards, are the personal writings of the Primarchs. Not their official declarations or strategic treatises, their private thoughts. Journals kept in moments of doubt, letters never sent. Confessions made to empty rooms when even demigods needed to speak truths they couldn't share with their sons. Guilliman has read them all now. Every word his brothers wrote in the shadows of their legends. And what he found there broke something in him that 10,000 years of stasis couldn't touch. Fulgrim wrote poetry about the terror of never being satisfied, of achieving perfection and feeling only emptiness. Magnus kept detailed accounts of every bargain he made in the warp, noting with scientific precision how each one cost him something he hadn't intended to pay. Mortarion's journals are full of self-loathing, page after page questioning whether endurance without purpose is virtue or cowardice. Angron's entries are brief, violent, but in a few places, in handwriting that suggests immense effort to control hands that only wanted to kill, he wrote about his gladiator brothers on Nuceria, about love, about the family he lost and could never replace. The Loyalists' writings are no easier to read. Dorn wrote about fear, about the weight of being the one everyone relied on to be unbreakable, and what it meant to know that you would eventually break. The Lion's journals are paranoid spirals, questioning everyone's motives including his own, trust and suspicion warring on every page. Sanguinius wrote beautiful, terrible prophecies about his own death, but also about his sons, about what the Red Thirst would do to them across millennia, and how he failed them by being unable to fix what was broken in their blood. They were all afraid, every one of them. Afraid of what they were, afraid of what they might become, afraid that the inheritance from chaos wasn't something inflicted upon them, but something they would have chosen anyway if given the chance. That's the real horror at the heart of it. Not that they were corrupted, but that corruption feels like truth. Like the universe showing you who you really are and giving you permission to stop pretending to be anything else. The Space Marines don't know this, can't know this. They need their Primarchs to be more than human, need them to be perfect in their loyalty or perfectly damned in their betrayal. The simple stories, the clear lines. It's what allows them to function, to fight, to die with certainty that their sacrifice means something. But Guilliman knows now that meaning is something you create, not something you inherit. That the Primarchs' greatest gift to their sons wasn't their gene seed or their tactical genius, or even their inspirational presence. It was their willingness to bear the weight of ambiguity so their sons could have certainty. On 1,000 worlds, the Imperium's preachers tell the story of the Horus Heresy as a battle between good and evil. The Emperor's loyal sons versus the traitors who fell to chaos. Heroes and villains, light and dark. And this story is necessary. It holds the Imperium together, gives meaning to suffering, provides context for sacrifice, but it's not complete. It's not honest. The truth is that every Primarch stood at the same crossroads. Every one of them felt the pull of chaos because chaos isn't external. It's the universe itself, the fundamental forces that shape reality, made conscious and hungry. The inheritance from chaos isn't corruption. It's awareness. The knowledge that you are not separate from the darkness, that it exists in you as surely as it exists in the warp. The traitor Primarchs accepted this knowledge and tried to use it. The loyal Primarchs accepted it and tried to transcend it. Both paths led to tragedy because both paths were incomplete. You can't use chaos without being used by it. You can't transcend it without understanding it. And understanding requires you to acknowledge that the monster and the saint are just different expressions of the same fundamental nature. There's a moment, recorded in the memories of a custodian who stood guard outside the Emperor's laboratory during the Primarch's creation, when the Emperor paused in his work and spoke to himself, or perhaps to something else. The custodian couldn't be sure. The Emperor said, "They will call it corruption. They will say I failed, but failure is the wrong word. This is introduction. They needed to meet the darkness, know it intimately, carry it inside them. Because an enemy you don't understand will always defeat you eventually. And humanity's true enemy isn't chaos. It's ignorance of their own capacity for it." If that memory is accurate, if the custodian heard correctly through the psychic wards and temporal distortions that surrounded the laboratory, then everything changes. The heresy wasn't a disaster, it was an education. The most brutal, costly, terrible education in human history, but an education nonetheless. 10,000 years later, the Imperium knows what chaos is, knows what it offers and what it costs, knows its own vulnerability to it. That knowledge has kept humanity alive in a galaxy that actively wants them dead. But knowledge comes with responsibility, with the burden of choice. The Primarchs couldn't choose what they inherited from chaos. The touch came before consciousness, before they could consent or resist. But what they did with that inheritance, how they responded to it, shaped not just their own fates, but the fate of every human in the galaxy. Horus could have resisted. Magnus could have stopped. Fulgrim could have put down the blade. Mortarion could have chosen death over surrender. They didn't, not because they were weak, but because in the moment of decision, the inheritance felt like destiny, felt inevitable, felt true. The loyal Primarchs faced the same feelings, the same inevitability, but they chose differently. Not because they were better or stronger, but because they decided that destiny is something you write, not something you read. Sanguinius walked toward his death, knowing he would die. But he walked anyway because the act of choosing your fate, even when you can't change it, is what separates a slave from a free being. Guilliman builds systems knowing they'll eventually crumble, because building is better than surrendering to entropy. Dorn held walls he knew would fall because the holding mattered more than the outcome. This is what the inheritance from chaos actually teaches. Not that corruption is inevitable, but that struggle is eternal. Not that humans are doomed, but that survival requires constant choice, constant vigilance, constant willingness to look at the darkness inside yourself and say no. Not once, every day, every moment, forever. The Primarchs are gone now, most of them. Dead or ascended, or lost in the warp or sleeping, or transformed into things that make death seem gentle. But their inheritance remains. In the gene seed of their sons, in the legends told across the Imperium, in the chaos warbands that still bear their colors, in the structure of reality itself, which changed because they existed. 20 patterns written into the fabric of the galaxy. 20 ways of being more than human. 20 warnings about what happens when you reach too far. And 20 proofs that reaching anyway is what humanity does, what humanity has always done, what humanity will continue to do until the last human dies on the last world under the light of the last star. The inheritance from chaos is the inheritance of consciousness in a conscious universe. The blessing and curse of awareness, the capacity to know evil and choose good, to feel darkness and seek light, to be broken and keep fighting, to inherit damnation and call it opportunity. Every space marine who goes to war carries this inheritance. Every imperial citizen who refuses to give in to despair embodies it. Every act of resistance against chaos, no matter how small, honors it. The Primarchs showed humanity the full spectrum of what they could become, the heights and the depths, the glory and the horror, and in showing them both, gave humanity the tools to navigate between them. The question that opened this journey was what each Primarch inherited from chaos. The answer is everything that makes them Primarchs: the capacity for greatness and damnation, for love and hatred, for creation and destruction, for being gods and monsters and humans all at once. They inherited the truth that there is no purity in a universe built on emotion and will, no perfection in a reality where thought shapes matter, no safety in consciousness when consciousness itself is the battlefield. But they also inherited something else, something the Chaos Gods didn't intend to give: hope, the possibility that inheritance doesn't dictate destiny, that you can be touched by darkness and not become it, that corruption is an offer, not a sentence, that every moment offers a choice, and choosing resistance even once changes the pattern of what comes after. The Imperium endures not because it's good, but because it remembers what evil looks like wearing the faces of heroes. The Chaos Legions rage not because they're damned, but because they remember what it felt like to be pure and chose abandon purity anyway. The war continues because both sides understand what the other could have been, what they themselves might have become in different circumstances. Somewhere in the warp, beyond time and space, all 20 Primarchs exist simultaneously. The moment of their creation and the moment of their ending collapsed into a single eternal now. And in that impossible place, they understand what they couldn't understand while bound by linear time: that they were never 20 separate beings. They were one being, one idea, one question asked 20 different ways. The question was this: what does it mean to be human when human is no longer enough? When the universe demands you become more and offers 1,000 paths to transcendence, each one a different flavor of damnation or salvation, or something that can't be distinguished between the two. The Primarchs answered that question with their lives, with their choices, with their inheritance, accepted and transformed and passed on to those who came after. And the galaxy burns with those answers, has burned for 10,000 years, will burn until the last light dies, but it burns. It endures. It refuses to surrender to the dark. That might be the only answer that matters. Not whether the inheritance from chaos was gift or curse, but that humanity received it and survived. Stand still, bloodied and broken and unbowed, carrying the weight of knowledge that would crush a lesser species. The Primarchs were the first to bear that weight. But they won't be the last. The inheritance spreads. The choice continues. The war goes on. And in the going on, in the refusal to quit even when quitting would be easier, in the determination to remain human even when offered godhood, there exists something the amount of chaos corruption can touch. Something that no dark god can claim. The simple, stubborn, glorious defiance of a species that looked at the darkness and decided to carry light into it anyway. Not because they were guaranteed to win, but because the carrying itself was victory enough.